This is the Rural Homelessness Podcast, where we discuss the important issues around rural homelessness, hear from those affected by it, and offer some solutions. Brought to you by the award-winning homelessness charity, the Ferry Project. Welcome to the Rural Homelessness Podcast. Well, hello there. Welcome aboard the Rural Homelessness Podcast. I'm your host, Matt McChlery. Thank you so much for joining us today. We want to elevate and raise the conversation around rural homelessness in the UK. And to do that today, I am joined on our very first episode by the director of the Ferry Project, Mr. Keith Smith. And the Ferry Project is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year, and this podcast helps to celebrate all of what's happened over that time. And so let's begin by introducing you to Keith Smith, the director of the Ferry Project, and find out a little bit more about how the charity first began. So Keith Smith, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Matt. Thank you.
And it's great to have you with us today. Now, could you just explain the reason why the Ferry Project has started this podcast series?
The Ferry Project is a homelessness charity, and we're based in a town called Wisbech. And Wisbech is situated in North Cambridgeshire. It's right on the border of Lincolnshire, Norfolk and Cambridgeshire, and a third of the town is in Norfolk, 2/3 of the town is in Cambridgeshire, and 4 miles up the road is Lincolnshire. So we're right in that niche at the top. So Wisbech itself is a very rural area. It's a reasonable sized market town of about 30,000 people, but surrounding it are just miles and miles of farmland. And historically, Wisbech has always been one of the agricultural areas of Great Britain. And our experience is that we started a homeless charity because there were lots of homeless people in the area, and now, 25 years on, it's our 25th anniversary this year, we're finding that we're supporting 300 people a year who are homeless or in danger of becoming homeless. And yet, when I talk to people about homelessness, whether that's in government or other charities or people on the street or whoever, everybody automatically starts talking about somebody who's homeless on a street and starts talking about urban centres and so on, where many of our clients are actually found homeless in fields. We've found people who were sleeping in trees, literally balancing on branches of trees to keep safe. We find people in woods, hiding under hedgerows, all sorts of situations they can be in. And yet there's a type of general feeling that the countryside doesn't have homelessness. This is an urban problem. So we started the podcast because we want to just share with the people of England just the fact that actually homelessness is rife across the whole of the rural sector of Great Britain, and that probably when you're driving through the Lake District, you pass wooded areas or hedgerows where people will be sleeping rough tonight, and people just don't see it, and they just don't assume it. And so governments over years have channeled funding into urban centres. They don't channel it into rural communities. Services are very sparse in rural communities, so people who are in need then move from their rural community where maybe they've been brought up or been living, and they go to the urban centres where everybody says the homelessness problem is. So what we're hoping to do is just to get people understanding that there is homelessness in rural settings, that actually if money was invested into those rural settings and the services offered were the right services, that actually people would love to stay in those rural settings and would like to and prefer to be supported there. And we just want to readdress this misunderstanding that homelessness is an urban problem. We want people to realise it's a countrywide problem, including the rural parts of Britain.
And a number of those issues that you mentioned just then, we're going to be looking at more specifically and in detail in some of the future episodes of the Rural Homelessness Podcast. If you're listening to this and this is something that sparked an interest or something that's close to your heart, why don't you hit that subscribe button and keep listening to the podcast, because we are going to be exploring all these themes and more as we go through the podcast. So, Keith, you mentioned 25th anniversary. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And being the start of a podcast for the 25th anniversary, I guess it's appropriate to hit the rewind button and just find out a bit about the history, find out how it all began. So, how did the Ferry Project start?
Well, as with all the best stories, it's quite convoluted and has many strands to it. I think the best place to start then is where the idea came from, rather than some of the practicalities, and where the decision, in a sense, was made to actually start doing this work, which of course was not called the Ferry Project at the time. So we actually need to go back to the 1990s, and I was a school teacher. I'm a chemist by training, and I was a head of chemistry at a secondary school, and I was also in the pastoral system, and also looking to develop my skills as a counsellor. And at the same time, I was part of a church called the King's Church, and I've been a Christian myself since I was 19. And in those settings, in the church settings where we were, what we were finding was people were meeting members of the church and asking members of the church for help, or members of the church were reaching out for help because they were homeless. And those individuals, there was young people, there was ex-military, there was people who were just travelling around the countryside because they were looking for work. So there was a range of people. But what was clear was there was no statutory sector response. So, nobody was doing something, but the churches were. So there's different churches in the town. Ours was just one of them. But the response that people were giving was really quite different. So some of the Church of England churches had vicarages, and people who in those days were called tramps were people who actually run a type of walking route around the country, getting jobs, seasonal jobs at different times. But they were known to these vicarages, and they would turn up there and say, "Hello, it's me again. Here's John. Can you help me like you did last year?" And that might mean they got a bed or be allowed to sleep in a barn or something, and they were given a bit of food and possibly some money, and they'd be pointed in the right direction to get a job. And a local farmer who was picking apples, say, or strawberries, we might give them some temporary accommodation whilst they worked for them doing some strawberry picking. So there's that group of people. The young people who were homeless, people say from the age of 16 to 21, 22, the social services might deal with some of them, but quite a few of them were just sleeping rough and just sleeping with friends on sofas and stuff, and they might have got kicked out from parents. And locally, we still had quite a number of young girls who were being removed from the family home because they got pregnant while they were teenagers. So we had all that type of homelessness going on. And as I say, ex-military people who were walking, were in the area. So the churches were all supporting them, and somebody might take them into the family, somebody might give them a bit of money, somebody might put them in a hotel. So all this was going on, and for me personally, we were involved, and we were supporting families who were helping. Now, I just thought, I was a teacher, I was busy doing things, I had a family and 5 children myself. And I just saw my job as being friendly and being nice to these people, and perhaps giving some money occasionally or whatever. But one Christmas, I was cooking the Christmas dinner. So I'm a chemist. I enjoy cooking. It's just another form of chemistry, really. So I was cooking the dinner, preparing it. I was peeling potatoes. I was in my house, my kitchen, and my 5 kids were in the lounge, having unwrapped some of their presents, and the grandparents were there, my wife was there, And the radio was on, and carols from King's College, and all the rest of it. And as I was preparing the dinner, I just felt intensely guilty. And because I'm a Christian, I started praying about that and asking God, well, I don't understand really why I'm feeling guilty. Here is this idyllic scene, and I should be just very grateful for what I've got. But then it was very clear, I felt, God put the image in my head of some of the homeless people I knew. And I felt a personal challenge to actually do something about it. And my instant response was to say, no, I can't. I've got a family, a young family. With 5 children, my wife was staying at home looking after the ones who were not at school, and I was teaching. I said, well, if my job goes, where's the money coming from, and so on. I can't do anything, and anyway, I don't know what I'm doing. What would I do? How can we help? What's the problem? But I couldn't shake off the feeling as I was preparing the dinner that I needed to do something. So by the time I'd finished peeling the potatoes, I said to God, okay, I'm prepared to do something. I just don't know what it is. You'll need to tell me what it is. And so from that point on, I felt, in a sense, if you like, commissioned to go and do something. So I started talking to people and asking, what could we do to help? And I started asking all sorts of people. So that was where, in a sense, if you like, Ferry Project started, at that point where I made a decision that, okay, I would obey what I felt God was saying to me and go and do something about the issue.
Was it an immediate response? Did you I don't know, you hang up your teaching cloak? I don't think that's quite a thing. You give your whistle back to the office or whatever it was, and then you kind of went out and, I don't know, started a homeless charity, or were there other things that led up to it? Was it immediate? Was it gradual? How did that happen for you?
Okay, so the as I said, all good stories are a good convolution. So simply put, the answer is no. It wasn't immediate. I did start to talk to people immediately. So you know, even over the Christmas holidays and so on, I started to talk to people about the problem and try to understand what was going on. And I started to talk to local churches and started to suggest possible solutions. And one of the initial solutions that happened after a couple of months was the churches agreed to get a pot of money together to actually put people up in a hotel. And that had a mixed reception, in the sense that we actually did house a few people, but on the whole, the individuals who were housed struggled in the hotel. And the hotel themselves struggled with the people we were placing there. And there was a clash. So in the end, the hotel asked us not to do it anymore. So that meant we needed to come up with another solution. Anyway, while all this was going on, personally, something unusual happened to me, which was, whilst I was literally in a class teaching, I lost my voice. So I was literally talking 1 minute, and my voice disappeared whilst I was talking. Now, I had bouts of laryngitis throughout my teaching career. I was about 14 years in at this time. So it wasn't totally unknown. And normally it comes back after about a week. So I just assumed that would happen. But in this particular case, it didn't. The being unable to talk properly lasted for 6-8 weeks, and the doctors really couldn't explain what was going on. They just said, "Don't worry, it will come back." Anyway, we got to Christmas. This is now the following year after the one where I'd been peeling potatoes. And my voice still wasn't right. So I'd be talking, it'd be like being back in puberty again. 1 minute it'd go up high, and another minute you couldn't hear it at all. Then it'd be all right for a few minutes and stuff like this. So the voice was all over the show, and I had to tell my school if I was going to go back to work in January or not. And I felt really I should. So I thought I'd best just see how good my voice was. So in one of the carol services that I was attending that year, I just tried to sing. I hadn't sung for 8 weeks, and I just thought I'd just try a verse or something. Anyway, So I started to sing, and I don't know, 4 words in, literally my voice just disappeared. So it went to literally nothing. I didn't particularly feel anything. I just couldn't make any noise at all. I obviously went to the doctors, and they started looking, and I had to go to consultants and see them, etc. And the end result was that they told me that I'd torn some of the muscles that controlled my vocal cords. And that I was silent because I couldn't actually make my vocal cords meet in a way that would allow them to make a noise. And that, in the end, lasted over 4 months. So I couldn't make any noise for that period of time. After that, I started to get a very, very quiet voice. And in the end, the doctors sent me to a speech therapist. What they told me was I needed to learn how to speak again, that my vocal cords my muscles had been permanently damaged, and I had to learn how to talk with the damaged muscles. And that process took me another 18, 20 months to do before my voice actually came back. So obviously, being a teacher with no voice is a challenge. So over those 2 years where I lost my voice and then tried to learn how to do it, I was eventually, I couldn't teach. I had to eventually retire. So the doctors told me that if I actually continued teaching, I could lose my voice again permanently. They made me retire on the grounds of ill health, and I was actually told I couldn't teach in the public sector again. So whilst all that was going on, my wife went out to work. I stayed at home and started looking after the children, which was fun with no voice. I always lots of stories I could tell you about what that was like, because what the youngest at that time was about 3.5, 4. He thought it was very amusing. But in all that, in amongst all that chaos, the one thing I now had was time, and I felt perfectly well. So what that allowed me to do was to start properly thinking about setting up a charity and getting it going, the bits of homelessness, what did we actually want to do. And rather bizarrely, I would say I managed to start talking to people. The way I managed to talk to people was on the phone. So the phone's an interesting thing. Certainly at that time, there wasn't that many mobile phones around. You used just the handset. People assumed that the phone was not working very well, so they listened on a phone. If your voice was very quiet, they listened intently, and actually you could have conversations with somebody even with a very quiet voice because they were listening. Whereas if I was in the room with them, my voice wouldn't carry more than a foot. So in the room, I was in situations where friends of me, my family, and myself, I was once invited to a lunch with somebody, and I went out, and my wife went out with me, and I sat down, and my friends asked my wife whether I wanted a drink because they just automatically assumed I couldn't answer. So it was the classic, does it take sugar concept for somebody with a disability, which I found really surprising, and in fact was really quite challenging. But on the phone I could talk. On the phone, people listened, and so during that 2 years, we had the discussions about it, and eventually, using support from a charity in London called the Oasis Trust, they helped us to set up what became the Ferry Project. So in May 1999, the Ferry Project became a registered charity, by which time we had about 11 volunteers, and we had a few £100, and we were starting to help some homeless people get some accommodation. So, yeah, and there's lots of other bits and pieces to that story, but that gives you the 2 basic strands.
Yeah. And so we've now got the charity established, and you said you tried kind of in the very early beginnings, sort of trying to house people in a local hotel, and that didn't go well. So what was the new plan now that you had kind of set up as a charity, just learnt that trying to house people in a hotel wasn't particularly the best solution. So how did you start to house homeless people and help them?
Okay, so the vision we had, so if we go back to the church, so remember this was all based around the fact that people were trying to help homeless people in church. And where we saw the best outcomes and the best success was where somebody invited the homeless person into their family. It was very costly for the family, in the sense that this person was very demanding. The homeless people would be very demanding and really at times quite challenging. But for those where the family and the homeless person got on well, the homeless person felt part of the family. They felt safe and secure, and they themselves started to change. And we saw some remarkable changes in people's lives over that. So the model that we started to go down was the idea of creating a family. So could we get a property, buy a house, say, have a couple that would be prepared to live with the homeless people, and support them in that new home. So that was our concept. So with the small amount of money we've been given by local people and volunteers from local churches, we actually rented a couple of rooms in a very large house that somebody had, where they used to let rooms out. And that was in a place called Beaufort Road in Wisbech. And so we had one room where a homeless person was sleeping and living. We had another room where a couple who was supporting that homeless person were staying, and they had a shared kitchen and shared bathing facilities. And back in, that would be 99, that's where we started. At the same time, we realised very quickly that once you've got one homeless person, if there's a second homeless person, you haven't got anywhere to put them. So we started to think about that. And the model was working. It was a young lad. He was only 18, and he was doing really well. He'd started before he came to us. He'd been living on the streets for a couple of months, and we'd offered to help him. And he'd just started to be offered drugs, and he'd just been started to be offered alcohol on a regular basis. And when he came into the work we were doing, he actually turned away from all that. So we didn't go down that route. He could easily have done. And indeed, we helped him to build his relationship back with his parents. So we saw a big success story there, and that gave us the desire to go on. So we actually approached the King's Church, which was what I was part of, and we asked them if people could help us financially. And indeed, the leadership of the King's Church agreed to take a special collection. That collection, we used the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 people. So in that story, Jesus had taught the people. It was late in the evening. They needed food. So he got them all sat down, and then they said, well, what food's available? And the only food that the disciples could find in amongst this massive group of people was a boy with 5 small barley loaves, probably buns, and a couple of small fish. And they presented this to Jesus. Jesus prayed over it, and then they gave the food out, and it didn't get used up. There was always more, and in the end, they fed the 5,000 men and their families who were with them. So that could have been 8,000 people, out to the small amount that this boy brought. So the leadership team said to the church as a whole, look, even if you can only spare £2, if you're prepared to give what you can give, we understand that everybody's got challenges in their life and their own financial needs. Just give what you can give, however small, if you're prepared to give it. And at that time, they gave about £2,500. And what that money did then was allow us to, one, consider of alternative accommodation, but two, to go out and employ a fundraiser. And the fundraiser then over the next 12 months raised £100,000. Now, one of the families in that story didn't have money to spare, but we were struggling to try and rent a house. The moment we told them we wanted to use it for homeless people, everybody said they wouldn't rent it to us. So this couple came to us, and when they said, bring what you can, they said, well, look, we can't give you any money. We haven't got any money, but we've got a 4-bedroomed house, and we don't need a 4-bedroomed house. So if you can pay us some rent for our house, we'll take the rent that you pay us, and we'll rent another house, a smaller house for ourselves, and you can have our big house. So they very generously moved out of their house, and we paid them a comparatively small rent for the house that we got. And they rented a small 2-bedroom house. And for a year, they lived in a rented house, and we lived in their house. And that allowed us to start doing some much bigger work. So we supported in that year about 8 people, and again saw some incredible changes. And that was the first time that we came to the attention of the local authority, and they started to notice that we were actually doing something, and that there was something going on. And with the money that we got, the 2,500 from the church, that allowed us to get this fundraiser, and so the whole thing started. So if we're actually saying when, in a sense, did the work of the Ferry Project truly start, that was about then, which was about the turn of the millennium, and that's really where it started to get going. And from the money that the fundraiser raised, this was £100,000, we could buy a house and employ one member of staff to actually live in the house. And so the model of this family really took off and really got going. And that all down to the incredible generosity of a few people who answered that call to give what they could.
That's incredible. So starting from very small, humble beginnings, to finally getting enough money to buy your first property to house people. Where is the Ferry Project now? 25 years on. This sort of small offering. What can you give and see what can be done with it? Well, what's been done with it? Where are we at today in terms of housing and services and everything else?
Okay, so let's share where it goes. So if we look at where Ferry Project is now, so Ferry Project is the primary homeless provider for Fenland District Council. So we're still a charity. We're an independent charity in Wisbech. And we now can have accommodation which can accommodate up to, I think it's 84 people. So we have a lot. Over the years, one way or another, we raised enough money to buy a hotel, and we redeveloped that hotel. And we now own that hotel, and the hotel itself now provides hostel accommodation for 24 people, each with their own rooms and their own bathroom facilities and so on. We have built in the courtyard of the hotel, because we're very fortunate that we have some grounds around it. So we built another 9 rooms of emergency accommodation, so people coming off the street can have emergency accommodation, literally making things available for person on a nightly basis. We've been commissioned by central government through Fenland District Council to provide support to rough sleepers. So anybody sleeping rough can be supported. We have an outreach team that actually goes out and tries to find people who are sleeping rough. We can provide people who are in danger of becoming homeless with support. And so last year we supported over 100 people who were in danger of becoming homeless to stay in their own accommodation and not become homeless themselves. And in an average year now, on top of that 100 that we support to not be homeless, we support another couple of 100 homeless people by giving them accommodation and support. And in Wisbech itself, as far as that type of basic homelessness support is concerned, we're the primary ones. There are some services for young people, but nothing for anybody else. And so we're providing that support to them. Included in that, all sorts of organisations have come on board. So let's pick up things like health. So a local GP surgery now comes into our hostel and delivers physical health support to people in the hostel itself. And they provide all sorts of additional support because homeless people have complex needs. Our local mental health trust provide funding to help us to have a mental health nurse based in our hostel, and she provides mental health support and carries out assessments with individuals, and that enables them to get mental health support quickly if necessary. And a good example would be, let's say they were on medication because they have a mental health problem, then she can help them access medication if they've lost it. So obviously when they leave whatever accommodation they're in, very often they don't take medication with them. They might come to us and be schizophrenic and not have their medication. She can get them very quickly their medication re-prescribed, and especially find their records and so on, and we can provide them with support very quickly that's appropriate to them. We employ 43, 44 staff because we're a 24/7 organisation, so we always have waking staff, and we're providing the service all the time. So the accommodation, these 24 bedrooms, they get support from staff whenever they need it and whenever it's appropriate. We have a worker who provides employment support, and we run activities. In the hotel, it's big enough that we've got a training kitchen, and we actually teach our clients how to cook, and we're also offering training courses to the community so that people on low incomes and indeed people who are prepared to pay. We're very fortunate. We've got a very highly qualified chef who works with us. She's done a wonderful, doing a wonderful job. So we have something called Ferry Project Cookery School. Again, the hotel's big enough that we have a space where a local arts group has now we've got an art gallery based in the centre. So that is open to our clients all the time, 24/7. So the homeless people can actually go and look at art at any time of the day. If they want to look at it at 4:00 in the morning, we have waking staff. They can go along and have a look. They can get their own private viewing. There's not many people who actually live somewhere where they can actually have their own art gallery, but they get that. And the arts group that put it on, called Blackfield Creatives, they actually provide sessions for the clients and help them and encourage them to engage with art and various forms of art therapy. The support workers, we do something called trauma-informed support, where we take into account the experiences that people have had so that we can support them in a way that's appropriate to them. And that way, each person is treated genuinely as an individual. And we're in the process of redeveloping our building, this hotel, to actually create spaces so that each room, each area can be specific for a particular type of person with particular needs. So some people need bigger rooms, some people need smaller ones. We've got a women-only area so that they can have a safe space to be in if they've suffered male violence and so on. And we've got various other spaces where people can have their particular needs met and get this particular support. And of it all, the hotel itself is a grade 2 star listed hotel.
I was just about to say, you've been saying this hotel, and I was going to say, it's a really nice building, this grade 2 listed Georgian period features everywhere building. It's really nice.
Absolutely. We're incredibly fortunate. One of the advantages, so we were talking earlier about being in a rural setting. One of the advantages of being in a rural setting that's not associated with tourism is you can buy property comparatively cheaply. So we were able to purchase this hotel. It's got, for example, it's got a wonderful plaster ceiling where the art gallery is based. And the plaster ceiling is a fine example of an early 19th century plaster ceiling, all fancy embossed plasterwork and so on. So it's beautiful. If you're listening on the podcast, if you go to our website, so that's www.ferryproject.org.uk, you can see pictures of it, and there's some really beautiful bits in it. And when we were buying the hotel, one of the reasons we bought it was we wanted to make a statement to homeless people. So, excuse me if you find this a bit challenging, but the reality is that every homeless person, all the people they know have in one way or another rejected them. Those individuals might not have done so aggressively or whatever, and there might be valid reasons why they couldn't have somebody living with them. But that means that every person that homeless person knows has said to them, "You cannot stay with me." And whether people like it or not, that actually is a form of rejection. So when homeless people come to us, one of the things that they come to us with is a feeling of being rejected by everybody, and therefore their self-esteem and their self-value is really challenged. So what we wanted to do by buying this beautiful building was to say to them, well, whatever's gone before, when you arrive with us, we're telling you you're worth it. And we're not just saying you're worth it. We're not putting you into a dingy room in some grotty thing, whatever your image of a poor hostel is. And I'm glad to say there's not many of those around anymore. But with us, we could genuinely say, no, we're bringing you into a Georgian, listed building. You've got your own room, you've got your own bathroom, you've got these wonderful facilities.
And just so that listeners get an idea, when you stand in your building and you look across the river, directly opposite through the windows, there is another beautiful Georgian building, but this one's owned by the National Trust, and people pay good money to go and walk up and down and have a little look in that one. So yeah, it's really good.
And the interesting thing, just as an aside, the interesting thing is that the National Trust property and our property was built by the same builder. It was designed by the same architect, and they were built within a couple of years of each other. And as you say, Matt, they face each other. And we often said there was obviously a keep up with the Joneses going on here, because the two buildings were clearly being built with each other. But over the years, that one was taken by a family called the Peckovers, who were part of the original Barclays Bank, and ours was kept within the more normal community environment, and actually came into the ownership of a person who owned the water rights to Wisbech. And when the water rights eventually were nationalised, it became part of the water board as well, and then was given to Wisbech Town Council to act as council offices. So this building's had many lives. But throughout it all, what we've seen then obviously is this is a prestigious building. It is one of the prime buildings in the town. So when somebody is homeless in Wisbech, they don't get put in a corner. They come to one of the best buildings in the town, where we can say, well, we value you. We know you're in difficult times and maybe you've made some bad decisions, but actually we value you and we want to help you get back on your feet.
And the accommodation you've mentioned at the moment is just your primary accommodation. That you've got more sort of move-on accommodation as well around and about, haven't you?
So obviously, so that accommodation in the hotel, we staff it 24/7, and the idea is that we help people who need support all the time. So it's available there. If they feel down at 3:00 in the morning, there's somebody to talk to, and so on. And it's a very protected environment as well. We have a courtyard, we have nice gates. We can provide them with a very safe and secure environment that's lovely to be in. But obviously, we want people to get back into the community. And I'll have to tell you about the name Ferry Project a bit later and explain why we called it the Ferry Project. But within that, then we then have worked with housing association partners. And they've rented us property, and we now manage those properties and provide the support to the properties. But we put people there, and they're flats, and they're normal accommodation that people would see around the town. And the individual can live in there, and we can give them what's called floating support. We go and visit them. We have telephone calls with them, check everything's okay. If they need any help, if there's a letter that they don't know how to respond to, if they're having difficulty with neighbours, if whatever the scenario is, our staff will get involved, and we support them over those challenges. And if they start getting into bad habits, we can challenge, because one of the things that we need to do is we act as a mirror. If people are behaving in a way that and that's inappropriate, and they say to us, "Oh, of course I'm not doing whatever it is," we can say, "Well, actually, we've seen you do this, and we're not rejecting you, but we're just letting you know. You can't say." You can't say you're not drinking if we've seen that you come home drunk. You can't say that you're not swearing at people or being aggressive if we've seen you swearing at people or being aggressive. We can't say that you're not, I'm not depressed, when actually we know you've not come out of your room for 4 days, and you've isolated yourself totally. So we can act as a mirror, and we can say to people, look, we need you, we want to support you here, how can we help, and so on. So we have that accommodation, and even down to we've more recently managed to get 6 modular homes built. So for those people who really struggle in a community environment where, our hostel is obviously a communal living space. There's lots of people living together. So for individuals who struggle in that environment, we've been able to put them into what are like 22-foot long caravans, but they're actually built, proper built houses, and they have their own lounge and bedroom and stuff. And where it's appropriate for people to be in that scenario, we can now put people into that environment and provide support in that. So the aim is to try and personalise the accommodation that we can offer, depends upon the needs of the individual, and really think that through carefully, both with them and ourselves. So, it's quite comprehensive. So at the moment, as I say, it's about 84 pieces of accommodation. And some of the housing associations that we work with now employ us to actually go into their property with their own tenants and work with some of those to help them maintain their tenancies and not to fall into problems. So we're trying to provide this support. And indeed, we now work in other towns in Fenland. So there's Wisbech, but we also work in the town of March, which is next to it, and then the town of Whittlesea, which is another one in the area. So we're starting to provide services into those towns as well.
Really good. So where did the name the Ferry Project come from then?
Okay, so let's go back again then to when we were in the property where the family had moved out, and we were looking at our name and so on. We were at the time, one of the properties that we were considering buying, what had been a pub that was in Wisbech, and the pub was called the Ferry Inn, and it had a big bar on the ground floor, and then it had, I don't know, 5 or 6 bedrooms upstairs. And we type of imagined that maybe we deliver some services out to the ground floor and use the 5 or 6 rooms upstairs as the accommodation for the homeless people. But unfortunately, somebody beat us to it, and they bought it, and off it went. But the name, the Ferry Inn, stuck with us. And indeed, when we registered the charity in May '99, we realised that the concept of the ferry suited what we were planning very well. So a ferry, if we go back to the 90s, there was no tunnel, there was no channel. So if you wanted to get from England to the continent, you had to get on a ferry. And if you wanted to take your car. So when you get onto a ferry, you might be totally independent before you get on. When you get onto the ferry provides everything you need. So there's a cafe on there, there's advice, if necessary, there's a bedroom and stuff like this. There's doctors and all sorts of things. And when you get to France itself, you can get off the ferry and you become totally independent again. So what happens is you go from a place you don't want to be to a place that you do want to be. And while you're in that process, you're being carried by the ferry and given the services and the support you need to get you to the place you want to go. So for us, that was a perfect image of what we were trying to do. What we weren't trying to do was take over people's lives and accumulate vast numbers of people who would be on our lists and so on. What we were looking to do was provide this support for this period of time to help people move from somewhere where they don't want to be, homeless, to a place where they do want to be housed, and support them on the way.
And over the 25 years then, how many people have you managed to carry from one side of the river to the other on your ferry?
Okay, so we've obviously done a count recently because of the anniversary, and what we've found then is we've got we can actually demonstrate we've supported over 3,500 people now in a population of, as I say, just over 30,000. So it's quite a significant part of the town has been supported one way or another over the years. And indeed, I haven't gone. Another aspect of the work we're doing is we've now got involved in preventative agenda stuff. We're trying to help people not get homeless. So part of that is we now run a community centre called the Queen Mary Centre, and have been doing so for the last 10 years. And in that centre, then we provided a base for community groups of different sorts to operate from. So the Citizens Advice Bureau is based in our community centre, and we have counselling services and physiotherapist and the diabetes eye clinics based there. We also have the classic things that go on in community centres like Zumba classes, and we have singing and people. There's a choir that meets there, and theatre productions and people people had parties and all sorts of things. And to give you an idea of that, so over 500,000 visits have been had to the community centre in the 10 years that we've been running that. So we've supported that. And we've also done work helping people get employment. And over the time we've been doing that work, we've supported over 1,000 people, and now we don't have an accurate record of how many people got jobs because some people don't tell us, but we supported over 1,000 people in trying to find work through all sorts of different techniques, and we know that hundreds of those individuals are now employed as a result of the support they've got. So yes, when we start to look at it, there's been quite a lot of influence. And let me just say, so going back to the day when I said to God, I can't do this by myself. Since then, we've had so many partners, so many people who've helped, so many people who've supported, and we can talk about that as well. But if we look, some people just like to hear about the finances. If we look at the money, so that £2,500 that was raised by the church back in 1999. So now our turnover is just over 2 million. It's about 2.2 million a year. And I've done a calculation, and we've earned, because although we're a registered charity, we operate as a social enterprise. We earn the vast majority of our own money. Last year, we earned 99% of our own money. So if we look at that, then we've now had as an organisation over £30 million of income, which we've used to support homeless people. And that's all been done through our charity. So the local authority hasn't had to provide all that support. We've done all that. And as a result of that, we've seen lots of people's lives changed.
Mm. That's excellent. Thank you, Keith. Thank you for chatting with me today. I look forward to having more discussions with you in future episodes of the Rural Homelessness Podcast. But for today, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for your time, Matt.
And thank you as well for listening to the Rural Homelessness Podcast. This podcast is going to come out twice a month on the 1st and the 15th of every month. So if you haven't already clicked that subscribe button, do that. And remember to come checking back again on the 1st or the 15th. And there'll be another episode waiting for you as we discuss more topics and issues around rural homelessness. Thank you for your company today. And I look forward to seeing you soon on another episode. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you for listening to the Rural Homelessness Podcast, brought to you by the Ferry Project. Visit our website on www.ferryproject.org.uk.